Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a real-time sketch. I've had lots of requests for a more slowed down version of my videos, and I hope to maybe talk you through some of the steps and the process I use to create an urban sketch like this. All the materials that I use in this sketch are all listed in the description box. This is a little bit of a different video for me, so if you do like this type of format, please let me know and like and subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get into the sketch. So here I've gone over the outside of the building with a wash of water and then just gone in with any kind of sky blue. For this I used manganese blue. Sometimes I don't want to use a sky because the building is a lighter color. I thought the blue around it, along with the foliage at the side, would create a nice border, would outline the building nicely. And so for the building, I just went over it with a wash of water. I chose a darker color than the reference for the building because watercolor dries a lot lighter, so I thought if I go in with something a bit darker, then I won't have to keep going over everything. You'll see later on in the video for this bottom portion, I was debating or not whether to include every single hole in the lattice, and I don't. So I am hoping that I can get out and sketch next week so I can film and maybe talk through a more realistic sketch time whilst I'm actually outside. But lately it's just, I'm finding it difficult to actually be able to get outside and sketch, which I hate because I love it. I feel like I usually go faster painting foliage, but I was just having a nice time with the sketching and I was just taking my time with this part, but I feel like I could go faster. For the foliage, I love using a combination of ultramarine and quinacridone gold. I think those are my favorite. That's my favorite combination. I like the greens that it produces, and I like leaving a bit of gold in the foliage. I love using paint first instead of pen. I got a comment one time that said that they thought that my sketches were not urban sketches and that they were more plein air and that it was confusing, and I wasn't sure why they thought that. I thought maybe because I use a lot of paint first, but my plein air paintings, I don't use any pen at all. And when I first started urban sketching, I tried to do it the way I thought everybody else was doing it, which was adding in the waterproof pen. And, along the way I discovered that I didn't even want those permanent lines, and I enjoyed putting in the paint first and then bringing bits together with the pen. I always wanted to try to have a mix of how I plein air paint and also the sketchiness. And urban sketching is meant to be fun, so don't let anybody gatekeep. It's all about what you enjoy. If you enjoy using certain mediums, if you enjoy painting it in a certain way or sketching things in a certain way, you do it that way. Because it's all about having fun in the process. And this is what makes it fun for me. I don't like having the permanent lines on anything. I like everything to be flowing. I love a lot of water going in with the pen. It keeps it spontaneous for me. Here I wanted to know what it looked like to have those dots in there on the lattice, and I changed my mind. I didn't like how it looked, so I thought I would just suggest it. I didn't want to include the deck chair because I feel like it would have distracted and maybe just looked a bit messy. For the windows, it was a combination of neutral tint and indigo, and I just laid down a wash and then added the pigment to the paper. I also added a diluted mix of turquoise around the building and the window. Usually when I don't see anything else left that I can paint in, that's when I'll go in with the pen. And I will often start with the white, so highlights, because that will then give me an indication of what else is needed. And I've said in a previous video that for me it's all about the happy medium between having the pen just enough to bring the sketch together but not enough to tell the whole story, if that makes sense. So like underneath on the lattice, I feel like if I would have sketched in or laid down pen in for every hole, like it just takes away. I just want to suggest things. If you're not sure on where to start adding the highlights, start on something simple like the windows, or if there's a massive dark, try and break it up with some hints of light. And so for this, the windows are a massive dark, and so I'm going to break that up with the idea that there are highlights on the wood of the window. Sometimes I'll add some squares of white because I have noticed that there are often a lot of stickers on shop windows, and so that can add some little detail that breaks up any big areas. As for the writing on the buildings, I do still get a little nervous on where the spacing should be and if it's going to look stupid. And then I remember that, it's just a sketch and they're not actually going to use this on the building. But a tip that helps me sometimes is to start at the end letters and then try and gauge the center letter and then go from there. And for this, I'm actually using a fountain pen, and these TWSBI fountain pens, I've listed it in the description box, but it has never dried out on me. I initially used a sample of this red ink just because I thought it looked cool, but it turns out, that a lot of red is in urban sketching, so it does come in handy. The pen I'm using here is a brush pen, and it's quite a fine nib, and I love it. I think it produces some really cool lines. So here I'm just going to define some areas with the pen, and it's basically just going over areas that would be in shadow anyway. And when in doubt, always just go for the corners, because there's always more shadow in corners. And you'll see that I'm not continuing the lines, like I leave gaps and lost edges in the lines as well as when I paint. And for this area, I just decided to add some crosshatch to just suggest the lattice. And I don't really worry too much if my lines are straight because I feel like that adds to the character. And again, I'm just going over areas that would be in shadow anyway, or areas that I want defined. So for like the pylon and the cables, it's another instance of I'm not drawing in every line. I want the viewer's eye to complete the line and fill in the rest. And I think that adds to the atmosphere of sketches. I also love to add in line variations, so like have a thicker line, thinner line, just breaks up any monotony. As for the pen strokes, I feel like just don't think about it. Just add in some dots and dashes and don't think about, oh, I'm creating tree foliage. Just add in some free lines. Always keeping in mind that you're just suggesting what is there. So just adding in some lines and squiggles here to suggest the foliage, like I said. And initially I wanted to keep in these air vents or like the AC units that were at the side. But further on, it just didn't make sense and you couldn't really tell what it was, so I do fill that in with blue. Here I'm just trying to figure out what needs to be emphasized, and I do lose that speaker on the right. It gets lost in the shadow. With palm trees, I find that a raggedy scuffed up brush is going to produce a better foliage or a better palm tree. And I feel like the more you try and make it look like a palm tree, the less it looks like a palm tree. Again, for this, I'm using just the same mix of blue and yellow, so quinacridone gold and French ultramarine. If I had more space at the side of this paper, I think I would have included the tree trunk. I wanted to keep it because I feel like it framed the sketch quite nicely. I feel like I did muddy it up a bit here, and I probably should have added in the check-in sign after I'd added the shadow, but I just didn't think about it. When the ink bleeds like that, I feel like it adds to the whole thing. Like, you don't even need to worry about it. I mean, everything is fixable. I feel like once you add in the highlights and the writing on buildings, it immediately starts to bring everything together, and I love watching that happen. I like to add my splashes. I wanted turquoise and yellow because I think that it matched everything. I don't know why I was fussing so much over that thing on the side of the building. For the windows, I like adding in some darker dashes or like some darker window panes. I think it adds a nice variation to the eye and makes it look a bit more like a reflective surface. At that point, I was questioning if that thick line was going to ruin the whole thing, but it's fine. And I'm just wanting to add borders to the windows in this chalkboard just to make them pop a little bit more. And for the writing, I just added any old thing. I was wanting to add in the suggestion of the boards, and I made the line thicker on this side because it was more in shadow. So the shadows were thicker and darker. I also wanted to add a bit more definition to these palm tree fronds, but I feel like maybe in doing that I lost the definition, and I feel like I should have made the shadow underneath them darker and then added highlights to the palm tree instead. But again, that's another learning thing, which the more you sketch, you realize these things. I was adding the side of the brush pen to kind of add some more texture and I felt like the building needed to pop more and I wanted to add more depth. So I'm adding more shadow to the foliage. And some shading underneath the awning, even though it doesn't appear in the reference. Here I started to realize that I feel like I'd lost the palm frond, and I tried to get them back, but I realized as I was adding in the highlight that the shadow underneath needed to be darker, and I decided not to do that because I felt like it would mess up the shadow and make everything worse. Here I want to just thicken up the window, and I was trying to get back the definition of the letter C. I felt like I wanted to anchor the building more to the page, and I thought the way to do that would be to add some shadow on the ground. And I feel like it would have worked, but maybe the color of the shadow was different. I always seem to struggle with shadow on the ground. I feel like nothing I put down ever looks right. And so I decided, nope, I don't want that. I'm gonna get rid of all that. And then I ended up kind of liking what was left after I smudged it and smoothed it all away. I feel like don't be afraid to experiment in the sketches and adding things into your sketches, because I know that when I first started urban sketching, I felt like I either had to include everything or make it exactly what I was looking at. But a way to decide what to include and what to omit is really like what drew you into the subject in the first place. So if you like a certain thing and you, for instance, I didn't like the deck chair in front of the building in the position it was, so I just didn't even want to include it and I left it out, and I feel like it doesn't even take anything away from what I saw. I wanted to make the sky pop a bit. I felt like it was just too faded into the background, and so I wanted to add a little bit more turquoise to the outside of the building. And here I was just scuffing away some areas just to add some lost edges, and here just scuffing away that bloom because I feel like it was taking attention away. Usually I love blooms, but I feel like in this instance it was taking away attention. And all you do there is just add some clean water and then just blot it away. And it's like it never happened. And then I wanted to add the location and what the name was. It's always fun to write with a brush pen. Gives that calligraphy look. This was a little bit of a different video. It was a little bit longer format. Let me know what you think of it. If you want more instruction, I do have a tutorial on my website, which I go in detail, step by step. I tell when there's drying times, when to start painting, when to stop painting, when to add pen, when to leave it. I give all the list of every material I use. And like I said, you can find that in the description box. And again, let me know in the comments if you like this type of video, or let me know if you have any other videos you'd like me to make, and I will see you in the next one.